I want to welcome Jane Hall here, and Vanessa is an associated professor from Institute of Veterinary and Animal Science at University of Copenhagen. Vanessa is as well a chairwoman for the non-profit organization DANWISE, which is a Danish society for women in science. And this organization bring the gender gap bring in sort of the problems about the gender gap in STEM, the STEM educations, humanity and social science field. And she is as well the leader of the group of brain development and diseases. Vanessa's speak today is titled "The Effect of the COVID-19 Shutdown on Academics and Students at University of Copenhagen." Vanessa will present the outcome of a survey of students and academics performed shortly after the university shutdown during spring 2020 in Denmark. Particular attention is focused on whether differences could be observed in gender. A very warm welcome to you, Vanessa. We're looking forward to hear it.
Thanks so much, Mia, for the very kind and nice introduction. And I'm so pleased to be here to share with you the good work that I think DANWISE is doing for academia in Denmark. We also represent the life science industry as well. And I'm going to present you a study that we have done over the spring, summer, and autumn, as you mentioned, on the impact of the shutdown. And this is really focused at the University of Copenhagen, but gives you some insight of what could be happening also at the other universities. So first of all, I need to introduce you a little bit to DANWISE. We are a nonprofit organization. As mentioned, we have a large number of members. We started in 2019, the beginning of 2019, but now have close to 600 members, and we have a very large following, over 700 on Twitter and LinkedIn, but we're also on Instagram and Facebook. And to become a member is absolutely free. If anyone is able to join, we welcome all genders, and we have a lot of benefits for being a member, and that is that we offer a lot of webinars on self-education. We have offered many webinars on how to write grants, building self-confidence, insight into becoming an entrepreneur. We'll be having a seminar coming up on negotiating your salary and all the process involved. So we offer a lot of things to our members. We also run a lot of political initiatives because we think a lot of good can be done at the political level. And I won't talk about those today, but I will share with you this study that we thought to run because we were concerned about the potential impact of the lockdowns that were experienced during the spring. So we have some missions. Here is one of the missions. You can see this diagram. It's called the scissor diagram. And what it's illustrating is the career pipeline in Denmark, shown here in brown and blue between males and females. And what we actually see, unfortunately, is a skewing of the proportion of these positions as we actually move up the career ladder. So we don't really see much difference in gender at the PhD level. We see also that there's no difference in proportions of males and females coming out of the education. But after the PhD level, what we do see is a decline in the number of female assistant professors, which becomes more exacerbated at the associate professor level and then the professor level. So in fact, now the latest figures we have from the Talent Barometer shows that only 23% of professors in Denmark are women. So, and actually we are lagging behind other Scandinavian countries. In fact, if you take all the Scandinavian countries, combine them, we can see that this disproportion really only occurs from the associate professor level upwards. So what is the reason for that? Well, we know there are reasons in problems in recruiting. There are issues women. We also have issues in promoting women, and we have a really marked problem in grants being given out to women. And of course, the grants are very, very important for helping to build someone's CV, which would help that person to become recruited, to also be retained and even promoted once they are in a permanent position. So what our aim and mission is to really try to close this gender gap, bridge it, and make sure that we have a nice even line between the genders in the academic pipeline. But we also see something similar happening out in industry. This is not unique to academia. This is across all industry and seen at the upper senior management levels. And there were a lot of reports coming out after the outbreak of coronavirus. And for example, this particular publication in Nature showed that there may be an impact on particularly female academics. This report by Juliana Viglioni in May was she actually looked at a number of preprint servers. These preprint servers are where you can actually deposit your manuscripts after you've made them. You can therefore get a real insight into the work and the productivity of academics, because it can take a long time to publish. So looking at publication statistics is sometimes not so accurate because it can take such a long time for the process. But looking at deposition of papers into preprint servers can give you a little bit of insight into what might be happening. And she found that in her study that actually there was a decrease in some of the preprint servers during March to April this year, in a reduction in the number of women, female first authors. That was not observed in all of the servers, but it still was a point of concern, suggesting that maybe women might be more susceptible to the shutdowns that were actually occurring across the world at around this time of year. So we also thought, well, what about Denmark? Is Denmark also being affected? Of course, we had a shutdown, a very hard shutdown in March and April. If we consider gender equality in general in society in Denmark, you might think that actually we're very, very equal in many ways in males and females. For example, these statistics highlight the amount of hours of unpaid work for men and women across many, many different countries. And Denmark is highlighted here by this red arrow, showing that for every day, there's approximately 4 hours of unpaid work that women are performing, which is including housework and shopping duties, and also including child and adult care, as well as volunteering, for example. And very nicely that in Denmark, this yellow here suggests this is over 3 hours of unpaid work for men. So when you compare Denmark compared to many other countries, and for example, Mexico, you can see that actually in terms of society, there's a lot more balance in Denmark. It's not perfect, but it's a lot more balanced than many other countries in Europe and even outside of Europe. But in contrast, if you also look at the household compositions in Denmark, we can see with this graph, what we're looking at is the number of households with children. That is actually shown in the orange and red. So just over 20% of the households in Denmark have couples or singles with children. But actually Denmark stands out in the red bar here, because this is the number of households of parents with only single parents with children. So in fact, Denmark is the highest country in the EU to have single parent households. And therefore, perhaps they might be impacted more negatively than parents that can share duties in terms of the crisis situations like we're experienced. So as DANWISE, we're very keen to, with a gender perspective in mind, figure out and investigate how academics and students were affected. And we have, since some of us are working at University of Copenhagen, we thought we would focus on this university to find out a little bit about this. So we wanted to find out how does the lockdown affect students and academics? can it actually have an impact on gender, and what might be and the long-term consequences of such shutdowns in terms of academic career progression, because we don't want the gender gap to get worse, we want it to get better. So one of the first things we did was look locally at the number of submissions on bioRxiv. This was just one that we selected, and we actually processed the data to actually only highlight the number of Danish authors, so only those that we investigated. And we tried to look at the proportion of male and female Danish authors in the bioRxiv. And we looked at a time period from when the shutdown occurred in Denmark, which was from March the 15th until the 15th of May this year. And we also compared that to the same time the previous year. And what you can see in this graph is that, yes, females are submitting much fewer papers in Denmark than males. This might be reflected by the also fewer numbers of female academics, particularly in the higher levels of the pipeline. But what we could see was actually in the first month of the shutdown, that there was a decrease in the proportion of female authors in the first month of the shutdown. We didn't see that in the second month of the shutdown. And one of the reasons why we think that might be the case is that we know that the schools opened at this time, and this might have alleviated pressure, for example, of parents with children where they would needed time to care for them at home. So with that data in mind, we thought, let's do a more complete study. So we contacted Uniavisen, which is the local newspaper at University of Copenhagen, to try to get our survey out where people could participate and contribute. That was actually done in end of May. And from that study, we have analyzed the data for academics, and we're going to present to you the outcomes in the academic survey and then also the student survey. So we had more responses from the academics than the students. We had 197 responses. This survey was given some preliminary information to those participating. We said that this was completely anonymous, and we encouraged both genders to reply, and that the survey only took about 3 minutes. We said that we would use the survey for potentially reporting in articles for the university media or even international journals. And we asked them a series of questions. We wanted to find out their demographics. Where were they from the university, and what career stage were they? What was their gender? Did they have children at home? And how many hours they'd been working from home during the shutdown. Also, how was their teaching obligations during the lockdown? And actually, we wanted to find out how productive they'd been in the lockdown. So we asked how many grants and articles were they submitting during this lockdown period, and asked them to compare to the same productivity in the same period the previous year. We also wanted to ask how productive they felt. So here's some of the results, and now we are hopefully submitting this very, very soon in an international peer-reviewed journal. But on the left-hand side, we can see a graph showing how many hours per day the men were working compared to how many hours per day the women were working. And what we can actually see, we broke this down to males with no children and males with older children and younger children. And it was definitely the younger children that were, the males with younger children that were more affected and were working fewer hours than those that had no children or older children. And we actually saw the similar situation in women. In fact, it was more exasperated in women with very young children compared to males with very young children. So they were working, more of them were working less than 3 hours a day. So we considered that women with young children, academics, were impacted the most in this lockdown period. And we also asked, how did they perceive their productivity? So did they feel that they were more productive or productive or less productive? And we could actually see by breaking down the career stages that there was actually differences. So that the professors, the really high end of the career, and associate professors actually didn't feel their productivity was affected as much as those at the junior levels or the younger levels, the assistant professor and the PhD levels. We might reflect maybe this has got something to do with proportions of children or younger children in these age brackets when they are more senior. So we also then looked at this by breaking down between females and males in general, and saw that there was really no difference in perceived productivity between females and males. But this was more of an issue with the individuals with children. So those actually with children, especially young children, felt almost 90% were feeling much less productive than those with slightly older children or had no children. So we could see that having children, and it really didn't depend whether you were male or female, this was actually reducing your productivity. When we analyze productivity per se, asking about their grants and publications submitted, we actually didn't see a difference in the same time period of the previous year. So although they felt they were less productive, we couldn't really see or visualize that from the data they gave us. This might be impacted by several factors. Of course, it can take many months to produce a grant or many months to produce a manuscript. So there may be, it may not be the perfect question, but at least we couldn't report any changes in productivity when we were analyzing their data they submitted. So from this part of the academic study, we can actually say that we saw that there were fewer submitted articles to bioRxiv by female first authors, at least in the first month of the spring shutdown. And that we see both male and females with young children worked much fewer hours during the shutdown than academics without children. And it seemed to be exacerbated, particularly with women with young children. And we could see that perceived productivity was very different depending on what career level they were at, but actual productivity didn't seem to differ. So finally, inequality does seem to exist during shutdowns, but it also is affecting both genders, particularly those with young children. And this might be exacerbating already existing inequality issues in academia, and having young children and closing schools can be really difficult to maintain productivity levels. And there seems to be still that it's affecting females in these cases more than males. So if we look at the student survey at the University of Copenhagen, here we had fewer responses. And so this is rather preliminary and merely just a little glimpse of what could be happening out there. And we asked some different questions in the survey. Which faculty are you in? What stage are you at your studies, your gender? Do you have children also at home? And how many hours are you working on your course during the lockdown? Would you say your ability to learn has been impacted on? And is this to do with your work environment, or is it to do with the lack of motivation? And also, are you concerned about the effects of the lockdown on your final grades or even your job possibilities in the future? And finally, asking how stressed do they feel? So this is unpublished data, and this is an overview of the demographics. We actually found that the most respondees were from the medical faculty at the University of Copenhagen, with about a quarter coming from science. And actually the majority of those responding were female, with only a small representation of males actually responding to this survey. It was a general mix between master's and bachelor undergraduates that were responding to this, and the vast majority of these had no children, but there were a few that did have children. We could actually see, when we look at how many hours they were spending on their course per day, that the majority were spending between 3 to 8 hours per day, but we were quite concerned with a few that were spending more than 12 hours a day on their course, and quite a lot actually spending 5 hours or less actually per day, which was a little worrying. we also saw that there was issues with a lack of motivation and also problems with the work environment that was leading to detrimental learning. We could see that, almost a third of them felt they were very affected by their work environment, working from home, whereas a large number were more mildly affected, and a smaller proportion didn't feel their environment was affecting their learning. But motivation seemed to be a much stronger problem for the students, that almost half of them felt that they were very affected in terms of motivation. So it seems that the work environment, a physical coming to the university, was crucial for keeping up their motivation. And only really a small proportion were not really affected. So almost all of them were either mildly affected and half of them were very affected. And we asked whether they thought they would be worried about the impact of this on their grades, so on their future jobs. And about a third of them were actually very worried about the effect of their final grades. And but more than a third of them didn't feel that they actually weren't so worried about their final grades. Not as many of them were worried about the impact on the future, whether they are looking to the future or not, or hadn't really considered it up until this point. Some of them were quite affected and thought that we had considered this impact on future jobs. And really the majority had a mild worry about the impact of the future jobs, but definitely they were more worried about the current situation and the effect on grades. And in general, how did they feel? I think this pie chart shows in blue here that almost half of them were more stressed or slightly more stressed than normal. And nearly a quarter of them were significantly more stressed than normal. And others were, no different than normal, or, So I think, again, this highlights that they were actually quite stressed, either mildly or very, very stressed in terms of the lockdown. So in this part, this summary here from this study, this student study, which showed that nearly half the respondents were spending 5 or less hours studying, and the work environment and physical context seems to be very important for learning. Thank you. And stress levels definitely have increased, and general well-being has decreased. So I think it's really important to look at long-term studies, because this was only a short window that we were evaluating, and we know that there are softer lockdowns continuing now, and how that impacts digital learning for students. So I want to finally finish on what can you do out there to help cope if you are feeling stressed, if you are not feeling motivated. I think it's really important to know that it's okay to feel how you are feeling. There are a lot of people in the same situation feeling probably the same way. And it's important to maintain a routine, a good routine, which includes physical activity, to ensure you get a good night's sleep, and that you make sure you stay connected with your friends, your family, and your peers, your colleagues, and your other students, to take breaks outside, to get the fresh, to look for places of help where you need it. For example, I found at the university where I work that there are courses for students from the graduate school, so to help PhD students to help take care of their mental health. And there are several upcoming seminars which are free to attend. And you can also look yourself to perhaps get some self-motivation books to read. There are so many out there, and I just put a couple of examples which might help to bring the mood back, and at least have coping strategies to learn from that might help you deal with this really remarkable situation. So finally, I just want to thank the DANWISE team. We are a really large team, a fantastic team to work with. They are so motivating themselves. And those that are highlighted in orange here are those that have contributed to the study and producing the report that I've shared with you today. So thank you very much.